Tonight, as the Prime Minister says armed police need clarity on their legal powers, how much trust should we put in them? Met Police chiefs say that staff have genuine concerns after one officer was charged with murder. But tonight, the head of the group, which represents black and minority officers, tells me the row has eroded confidence in the force. Meanwhile, the row over the potential scrapping of the northern leg of HS2 is growing, forcing Rishi Sunak to insist he is committed to levelling up. And while the Lib Dems are in buoyant mood at their autumn conference here in Bournemouth, questions remain about whether they'd be willing to go into another coalition government. All that and more from Lib Dem conference with Polly Mackenzie, the former advisor to Nick Clegg, and the Lib Dem House of Lords leader, Lord Dick Newby, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Bournemouth, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Now, we've taken the show on the road for the party conferences, and the first stop is right here in Bournemouth for the Lib Dem conference. We'll have lots more from here shortly, but before we do that, I just want to bring you the big developing story tonight here on Sky News, which is the latest on the allegations against Russell Brand. Now, police have said this evening that they're investigating allegations of sexual offences as after claims were made against him. Russell Brand has, of course, denied the allegations, and he said tonight that he's the victim of a conspiracy to silence him.
Of course, we're talking about events of the last week, but in particular, the collusion between big tech and government and an apparent concerted effort by legacy media and now the state and big tech to silence independent media voices. Obviously, it's difficult for me to be entirely objective given the events of the last week, but that is what we must try to do.
Well, we can talk now to our correspondent, Katie Spencer, who's been following the story for us. Katie, what's happened today?
Russell Brand had very much teased ahead to the fact that he was going on the free-thinking platform Rumble. He was going to make his normal videos and post about his interpretation of how the last week had been. 20 minutes before his video went live on that streaming platform, we had the Metropolitan Police basically upstaging with their own statement and putting out an update of their own with regards to the response that they'd had over the last week to the reporting by the Sunday Times and in the Dispatches documentary, those claims made by 4 women alleging rape and sexual assault from Russell Brand, which he, of course, has vehemently denied. They put out a statement before Russell Brand's show went live saying that they'd received a number of allegations of sexual offences that had been made in London as well as elsewhere in the country. They went on to say that all of the allegations were non-recent and there have, of course, been no arrests, but they also said that they wanted to put out a call for anyone with information to come forward. And in a statement, Detective Superintendent Andy Furphy from the Met Central Specialist Crime Command said that we continue to encourage anyone who believes they may have been a victim of sexual offence, no matter how long ago it was, to contact us. We understand it can feel like a difficult step to take, and I want to reassure that we have a team of specialist officers available to advise and support. It wasn't certain whether or not Russell Brand would continue to post a statement up on Rumble after that, but 7 minutes later than it should have been, he did post this video, not going into any of the details about the claims that he is facing, but alluding, as we might have expected, to there being a bigger conspiracy at play, talking about how he'd been demonetised from YouTube and how it was a collusion between big tech and the government and old media. So Russell Brand basically being upstaged tonight by the Metropolitan Police, who have put out that statement saying they are investigating further claims.
Katie, thank you very much. Katie Spencer there on those developing allegations surrounding Russell Brand, allegations he denies. OK, so I want to talk now about the extraordinary row that we've seen regarding the Met Police. Now, last week, an unnamed officer was charged with the murder of Chris Cabba, who's a 24-year-old man shot dead in South London last September. Now, that led to several hundred firearms officers effectively putting down their guns and saying, we're not doing this anymore. And, you can understand why they feel like that. They're worried. They're worried about the heavy responsibility of carrying a weapon. They're worried about getting a split-second decision wrong and ending up in prison. And the Home Secretary has even tweeted about it. She said that officers risking their lives to keep us safe mustn't fear ending up in the dock for carrying out their duties. And she's ordered a review now into armed policing. But I just want you to imagine what would happen in a world where armed police officers could never be charged. A unit effectively above the law, in a force that's been found by the Casey Review to be institutionally racist and misogynistic. So I guess my question tonight is that really the way? Would that really be the way to rebuild trust in the Met Police? Well, we'll be discussing that in the first part of the show, and our first report this evening comes from our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt.
Back from the brink, after 3 days of protest, some firearms officers agreed to pick up their weapons again, but not all of them. It meant that military backup has been stood down, for now at least. More than 100 officers with the Met's firearms unit, SO19, had refused to carry weapons. A protest at the decision to charge a colleague with murder after he'd shot dead a suspect. Former Met marksman Tony Long was cleared over a previous fatal shooting and understands the latest revolt.
I guarantee that every single man and woman in SO19 that has handed in their cards have done so after a massive amount of soul searching. But the reality is they cannot continue being treated the way that they're treated when they've done exactly what they've been trained to do.
The partial climb down came after a promised review of firearms operations by the Home Secretary, a move urged by the Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley, who called for better legal protection for gun cops. His force said in a statement, "Many are worried about how the decision impacts on them, on their colleagues and on their families. They are concerned that it signals a shift in the way the decisions they take in the most challenging circumstances will be judged."
Now, it's important when they're using these legal powers that they do so with clarity. That's why the Home Secretary's asked her department to review the guidance that the officers are operating under to make sure that it is robust and that it commands the confidence not just of the officers but of the public as well.
The controversy follows the death of Chris Cabba, whose car was followed and boxed in by armed response units in South London a year ago. Mr. Cabba was shot once in the head. Last week, an unnamed police officer was charged with his murder. It's not clear what persuaded some to return to firearms duties. Perhaps the promise of a Home Office review, perhaps the Commissioner's stated understanding of their concerns. But officers tell me they don't just want words, they want action too. Not everyone believes the police should be treated differently.
What those proposals amount to is a plea for a special status, a privileged and protected status for police officers, which would serve to allow them to avoid even the scrutiny or investigation as suspects right from the outset.
The officers' brief withdrawal of weapons was a warning shot. The threat of a repeat is still there. Martin Brunt, Sky News at Scotland Yard.
Now, a little earlier, I spoke to Andy George, who's the president of the National Black Police Association, and I asked him what his reaction is to the firearms officers who are laying down their weapons.
Having carried that burden myself for 10 years within the Police Service of Northern Ireland, but I think the overarching feeling for me is saddened and disappointed. Saddened and disappointed at the timing of this action that's been taken. You know, some have described it as a protest, some that there are well-being concerns. I think the timing and the fact that this has happened before, where there have been threats of this nature, that people would remove their tickets, is the thing that really disappoints me. It's a privilege to carry a firearm. It's a heavy burden. It's something that not every police officer can do. But again, we have to be held to the highest standard possible. We have to be open to that scrutiny and accountability whenever somebody loses their life. So definitely disappointment.
You say that carrying a firearm is a heavy burden, and I guess that's what these officers would say. You know, it is a heavy burden, and there's an anxiety and nervousness that a split-second decision, and you could end up in jail. Do you understand why people might argue that case?
No, completely. But again, the thing that I would say is that's a wider debate. That has always been there. I carried a firearm from I was 20 years old in PSNI. I've been a firearms officer from 2008 to 2018. So I completely get that. But even then, I knew what would happen if I had to discharge my firearm. I went out every day knowing that there was the potential for that to happen. I never wanted it to happen, and thankfully it didn't happen whilst I was working on duty. But I knew that what would follow, and we were well versed on it. So that hasn't changed, and I think the timing is the bit that is really going to send shockwaves, not just the firearms community, the policing community, but I think the wider public have a right to expect that we're held to the same standard. There is that old Pelian principle that the police are the public and the public are the police, and we should be held to the same account. There should not be another like almost two-tier system of justice within this.
Can I just ask what you mean when you say the timing of this? What do you mean by that?
The timing around that, the officer being charged with murder, the fact that a few days after that happened, the decision to hand down their firearms, that's the bit that doesn't sit well with myself. There may well be a wider debate around incorporating the unique position police officers find themselves in. But for me, the timing just after one of their colleagues is charged with murder, it just doesn't sit well. And for me, what has happened is Londoners across the city have been left less safe. They have been more open. Counter-terrorism operations haven't had the same capability. And that's the most concerning part for me. Certainly have the debate, but just do not do it in this manner and do it in the longer term. And particularly wait for the results of the murder inquiry or murder case to unfold within the court system, because that's when we should pull out any learning and we should be allowing due process to continue.
Talking about due process, the Home Secretary has tweeted about the event. She said, we depend on our brave firearms officers to protect us from the most dangerous and violent in society, and then goes on to say they mustn't fear ending up in the dock for carrying out their duties. Officers risking their lives to keep us safe have my full backing. What do you make of the Home Secretary's tweet? Was it appropriate?
Feel it was appropriate, not in the circumstances, not with the timing. I think that could have happened behind closed doors. I think what we need to do is certainly support our firearms officers, listen to their concerns, but we also have to understand that somebody has just lost their life and there is a case ongoing. So I wouldn't want to get into detail. I wouldn't want to prejudice that investigation and that case which is going to unfold. I think now is not the time to be showing that support. Now is not the time to be taking out those learning points or reviewing armed policing in its entirety. I think there may well come a point once the evidence is presented in court, but that process must be left unabated. It must be fair, it must be independent, and it must be robust.
I just want to zoom out for a minute and look at some of the wider issues at play here. The Casey Review found the Met Police to be institutionally racist and misogynistic, and it also found the Specialist Firearms Unit in particular to be not only overwhelmingly white and male, but to have a toxic culture of bullying, racism and sexism where normal rules do not seem to apply. How difficult do you think the police's relationship is with the black community in particular?
I think it's probably been its lowest. We've had different points with the murder of Stephen Lawrence, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and the report being put forward by Lord Macpherson. 6 months ago, Baroness Casey almost predicted the situation we're in now. She mentioned the fact that officers hold a disproportionate amount of power over their senior officers based on the fact that they can withdraw their authority to carry firearms. I think the fact that it has been a black male that's been involved in the incident exacerbates the issues. We have had a number of different things with Up Hutton, the issues at Charing Cross Police Station, Child Q. Confidence was already at its lowest. So I think now that the Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, coming out and asking for a lower threshold for the IOPC, we have to remember that the IOPC had to step in those investigations, and Baroness Casey reviewed the Met's own data and spoke to the Met's officers and staff to find out her report. The Met already knew that and they didn't take any action by themselves.
And just finally, when you posted about this on Twitter, giving your own opinion that we've seen you express in this interview as well. And I'll be honest, I was pretty shocked to see some of the response that you received, some of the abuse, to be completely honest. Were you shocked by it?
Fortunately not. I put out a tweet like that reasonably balanced given all of the facts. And as I said, anonymous police accounts, retired members come in, and all they're doing is showing the public exactly what the culture of policing can be. You know, policing can be the very best of us, but can it also be the very worst of us? And I think what we've seen in that Twitter feed, what we've seen in Baroness Casey and other reviews is the very worst of policing. And again, we need to understand that police culture needs to evolve. We need to be held to account, and having lower standards, that's not going to deal with it. We need to make sure that there's more independence, more accountability in policing to make sure that we deal with the many issues that have been laid out, not only in that Twitter feed, but in previous reviews.
Well, there was Andy George saying that the standing down of firearms officers and the timing of it doesn't sit right with him, in his words. Well, let's talk to our duo for the evening, shall we? Polly Mackenzie, who was Director of Policy for Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister. She's now the Chief Social Purpose Officer at the University of the Arts London, and Lord Dick Newby, who is a Lib Dem leader in the House of Lords, the Lib Dem leader in the House of Lords, I should say, to give you a correct title. Now, we just heard there from Andy George saying that it doesn't sit right with him that firearms officers had decided to, hundreds of them, decided to effectively stop working because of what's happened with that murder charge. Do you have sympathy with the firearms officers here?
I have enormous sympathy with them. Those armed police officers have an incredibly difficult job, and there's a tension, as you set out at the beginning of this item, because making those split-second decisions when lives are at stake, incredibly difficult, incredibly high pressure. And if they're frightened about that and they're not getting the support they need, that needs to be addressed by the leadership of the Met. But we also know that policing has to happen by consent. There are a lot more civilians than there are police officers, and the way that policing works is really by people assuming that the police are broadly on their side, that there is a trusting and relationship between citizen and the police. And if that has broken down, and we know that it really has in London in so many ways, that also can't work. You cannot ever win by violence in policing. There's just not the numbers. And we actually have to get to that point of reforming the Met, building the trust of the officers, but much more importantly for the officers themselves, as well as the citizens, rebuilding the trust between the citizen and the police force.
What's your take on this?
Well, every morning when I go into my office, I pass two armed police officers who are protecting me. So I start off with a very sympathetic view, not least because we have had intrusions into Parliament in recent years. And I always think they're going to have to make a split-second decision, possibly, after a long period when they don't have to make such a decision. So I have every sympathy with them. I think that the key thing, if you can get it, is clarity, so that they know what the rules are, and then whatever the rules are, they can be supported, and there's a minimum of ambiguity. In split seconds, though, you're always going to get that. But as Polly says, there are two problems here. There's a problem in that the officers themselves have lost trust with the management and the Home Secretary, incidentally. But there's also a problem that a lot of citizens of London have lost trust with the police. So the biggest job, it seems to me, of the newish Commissioner is to rebuild that trust both ways. And I actually don't think that the Home Secretary sort of jumping in quickly with the sort of comments she's made today is going to help him do that.
I can see you nodding there.
Well, we have this really weird situation, actually, where the Home Secretary appoints London's local police commissioner, but they get to consult the Mayor of London. But it's an odd hybrid police force. That's London's local police force and then the national police force for things like terrorism, and I don't think that works. I actually think we need to completely reform the Met. Allow it to have a proper London focus, reporting to the London Mayor, and think about what our national policing functions need to be. We know there are big national strategic policing issues like county lines drugs, like terrorism. Actually, those would be much better addressed by a proper national style police force, and give the Met clarity about its purpose, its people, the people of London. I really think that would offer a real reset moment to allow the reforms that Dick's talking about to happen.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it feels to me like we've been kicking the Met a lot, and rightly, you know, if you look at some of the issues and the allegations that have come forward, including on this programme and elsewhere as well. But we were just talking, weren't we, while we were watching Martin's report, and that question that was posed about, do we have a problem with the armed police? And you were making the point that actually in the UK, compared to other countries, probably not that bad.
No. I mean, how many cases have there been in the last 5 years where an armed officer has shot somebody and it has been very controversial? At most, very, 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 very few. So, hard cases make bad law. This is clearly a very difficult case. They need to look at that, but more importantly, going forward, as I was saying, rebuilding trust, having clarity, but leadership is the key to doing that. And that's why one hopes that the Commissioner, who has made a good start in my view, is able to show the leadership that will reassure his force that he stands by them when they behave properly, and assure Londoners that he stands by them to make sure that the police acts in the way they'd want.
It's a big job, and it feels
Big
like
job.
this is a big challenge right now for him. Thank you very much to both of you. We'll be talking to both Lord Dick Newby and Polly Mackenzie later on the programme as well. Now, coming up on the Politics Hub, what on earth is going on with the HS2 rail link? With rumours that the link from Birmingham to Manchester will be scrapped, is a whole project on a road to nowhere? That is next.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Push the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region.
I'm going to have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
They are coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight. What's your feeling about the future then?
Blake, it'll be finished, I don't know.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. We're in Bournemouth for the Lib Dem party conference. Now, HS2. It was supposed to be an example of ambitious long-term investment, bringing the country's creaking rail network into the 21st century and linking London and Birmingham to towns and cities in the north of England that were poorly served by rail. Instead, the only part of HS2 that we know is actually going to happen is linking Birmingham to Old Oak Common, and you probably don't need Google Maps to tell you that's not even making it to central London. Well, today, the Prime Minister addressed rumours that he's planning to scrap the Birmingham to Manchester leg of HS2.
We've got spades in the ground, we're getting on and delivering, but across the north what we're also doing is connecting up all the towns and cities in the north, east to west. That's a really important part of how we will create jobs, drive growth across the region, all part of our plans to level up. Free ports are another good example of that, whether that's in Teesside or elsewhere, attracting new investment, new businesses coming in, all good examples of the government levelling up.
Now, exactly a confirmation there, is it, that HS2, the second leg, is going ahead. But of course, Conservative grandees have been falling over themselves to put on record their bitter opposition to any scrapping. Here's the former Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Heseltine, speaking to us earlier.
I live in the heart of it in Northamptonshire, where our countryside has been scarred deeply. Property values affected, the environment seriously undermined, in order to build what is now potentially a sort of toy town rail. I mean, who wants a faster rail between London and Birmingham? And it's not even that, because it doesn't even go to Euston. So there'll be very considerable anger in my part of England from the people who have already had to put up with all of this, to be told that there was no point in it.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins us now. Sam, what is going on with HS2?
So we are fairly sure that HS2 plans north of Birmingham all the way up to Manchester are likely to be culled at some point in the coming weeks or months. We have a suspicion that the same might happen, that the trains might end at Old Oak Common rather than Euston, so essentially around Ealing. And we're not quite sure what, if this saves some money, this is going to fund, whether it is some kind of east-west line, whether it's improvements to local train lines, or even road, or even some money being put aside for tax cuts. So that's the thrust of what we think might happen. Now, on Saturday night, the papers were reporting that we could get an announcement this week. And there was some surprise last night when I broke the news that actually there were some in Downing Street saying it wouldn't come this week at all. It might not come, in fact, until mid-November in the autumn statement. That tonight, Sophie, is still the position. There are some fighting to bring it forward, but it looks as if we're going to go into Tory conference in Manchester with very little clarity about whether or not the rail line will go there. We think not, but they're not going to be told officially before Tory activists gather at the weekend there. It's
extraordinary uncertainty for so many businesses and people, of course, who this impacts. Now, there's another story that I want to ask you about, Sam, while I got you here, and that is inheritance tax, because there's been lots of reports about inheritance tax as well. And can you just tell us what's going on with inheritance tax?
Again, reports at the weekend that could come maybe in Rishi Sunak's conference speech, maybe some kind of hints in the autumn statement, or greater confirmation in the March budget next year. Nothing is coming on inheritance tax this year. Sources are absolutely adamant that is untrue. It's been untrue for some time. There are some who think that it was taken out of the Prime Minister's speech 10 days ago, and in fact you can see the Chancellor's language about it hardening in that period, but I am told even that it was never seriously in the running. So whatever you've read, for now, forget it.
I mean, it is just the loss of control of the news agenda here is quite extraordinary.
I mean, you're seeing Tory conference agenda splattered over the papers. Rishi Sunak went as far as giving loads of projects code names so they didn't leak, and even the code names leaked.
Sam, thank you very much. Sam Coates there on what is or isn't going on, or what we don't know, what we do know on inheritance tax and HS2. Now, coming up on the Politics Hub this evening, we're going to be hearing Beth Rigby's interview with the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey. Is he ready to be a kingmaker at the next election? And if he is, what would his price be? That's next. Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. We are live from Lib Dem conference in Bournemouth. Now, the C word has been spoken in hushed tones throughout this conference so far. Can't believe I said that on air. Coalition with the Conservatives in 2010. Coalition gave the Lib Dems their first taste of power under Nick Clegg's leadership. But while the party acted as what it saw as the moderating influence on David Cameron's government, it ultimately went unrewarded at the ballot box with a wipeout of their MPs in 2015. So are the Lib Dems ready for another coalition, this time with Keir Starmer? I've been sampling the mood of party activists. So here we are at Lib Dem conference in Bournemouth, the glamour of the Bournemouth conference centre. It's the first time the Lib Dems have met in person at an autumn conference for 4 years. And I'll be honest, the atmosphere is pretty good. They seem pretty chipper. Now it's a party conference, which means the bars are always busy, but I want to take you into the exhibition hall. That's where all the main stands are. Try and find some people to talk to. How do you feel about the idea of a coalition with the Labour Party?
OK, I don't like coalitions. Didn't want to have a coalition in 2010. To be honest, we just need to get as many Liberals in Parliament as we can.
Even if it's a way of keeping the Conservatives out of power?
I'd rather not do that. I think if you vote Liberal Democrat, you're voting for a Liberal Democrat. You're not voting for a coalition. But who knows? You know how these things could pan out.
I think we are, as a party, still very, very bruised by the experience of coalition 2010 to 2015. We were given a vote on that as members of the party. I voted for that at the special conference. I would be much more cautious about doing that now.
I think you'd probably have to have a very firm red line on something like electoral reform, and you would have to have some assurances that Labour would be more liberal than they are and more willing to actually be bold on environmentalism rather than the kind of step backs we're getting from Keir Starmer at the moment. So I think you need some radicalism. I think you would need a commitment to electoral reform.
So your red line would be electoral reform, you think?
Personally, my red line would be electoral reform.
Referendum or just straight out policy?
No idea.
Well, Beth Rigby, our political editor, joins us now. Beth, it's interesting, isn't it? It's the first time they've met in person for an autumn conference for a few years. And it feels like quite an important event for them, right?
It's a really important event. I mean, you were talking in your introduction about the kind of 2015 wipeout. Let's put it into context about where they were and where they are now. 57 seats in 2010, into a formal coalition with the Conservatives, came out of the 2015 election with 8 seats. I mean, nearly, yeah, I know, blows your mind. Wipeout. I mean, it was wipeout. And now what you see here is Ed Davey and delegates with their tails up because they're rebuilding. They now have 15 seats. They've won 4 by-elections from the Conservatives, and they are looking at 2024 thinking we could become a power broker again. We might have a shot at coalition or calling some of the shots in government. We might become the 3rd biggest party again in Parliament. Currently, that's the SNP. So there's a lot to play for in a way that they were left in despair after going into coalition. And then you remember, you did that election, I think, you know, Osborne and Cameron just killing them in all of those southwest seats like the Lib Dem wipeout. So it's a massive conference. It's the biggest conference for them, really, you could argue, in a decade or more.
Yeah, exactly. And all those seats, it does feel like they're kind of eyeing them up. They're thinking, is this the blue wall that we could drive through? You interviewed Ed Davey, we're going to hear that in a few moments, the leader of the Lib Dems today. How did he seem to you?
Well, he seemed like he didn't want to talk about the 2 sort of biggest policies, if you like, or identity of the Lib Dems, one of which is coalition, because it was the formal coalition that both defined 2010 to 2015 and then killed them afterwards. And then, of course, Europe and Brexit, the big EU party. And this is a leader, interestingly so, he doesn't want to talk about either of those things. He doesn't want to talk about coalition. He doesn't want to talk about going back into the European Union, even though it's in his policy documents, because what they want to do is talk about what they think voters are talking about or telling them on the doorstep, the NHS, public services. But of course the talk all around here, and you were doing it in your Voxes there, at talking to delegates, is all about can they be a power broker. Now, interestingly, he has emphatically ruled out a deal with the Conservatives. Why? Because he's facing all these Conservative battlegrounds where the kind of main thing on the doorstep is, will you take out the Conservatives? So he doesn't want to look like he's doing a deal with them. But when it comes to Labour, a different story. And I have to say, Keir Starmer has done exactly the same thing in an interview with me early this year, ruling out a deal with the SNP, but not ruling out a deal with the Lib Dem. So I think there's a kind of courtship going on from afar, although neither of these men particularly want to admit it.
I like that. It's kind of like the sort of school disco,
like
when they're sort of like
sniffing each other.
A couple of glances, but yeah, a bit wary as well. Let's listen to Beth's interview, shall we, so you can make up your own minds. Thank you very much, Beth. Let's listen.
The formal Con Lab coalition killed you over a decade ago. Now you're on the way back. With that in mind, you surely emphatically would rule out any deal, informal or formal, with the Conservatives.
Well, I have ruled out dealing with the Conservatives for a very good reason. First of all, I personally have fought the Conservatives all my life. I took my seat from the Conservatives. I fought them at every election. And so I and many Liberal Democrat MPs have always been against the Conservatives. And even in the coalition you mentioned, we fought them every day.
Ed Davey, clearly, you are clearly ruling out any sort of deal with the Conservatives at a general election. Do you also rule out any deal, formal or informal, with the Labour Party should it become the biggest party?
Well, beyond ruling out a coalition with the Conservatives and any dealing with the Conservatives, I'm not going to speculate about what else could happen.
So you're not ruling it out?
No, because what I'm...
No, it's clear you're not ruling that out.
What is clear, and I'll be clear about what I'm clear about, Beth, is I'm clear about our need to beat lots of Conservative MPs, to get more Liberal Democrat MPs elected. And I'm not going to speculate what else may happen after polling day, because I really think my job, and I've seen this in the Westminster Village quite a lot, people get focused on that.
Let me put it another way. You're not going to rule out some sort of deal with Labour, whether informal or formal. You're not going to emphatically rule that out right now, like you've just done with the Tories.
I am ruling out dealing with hypotheticals. I'm completely ruling out...
the Tories is a hypothetical, and you've ruled that out.
No, but Beth, I'm sorry. I've made really clear, and I'll keep making clear, that my job to do is to get more Liberal Democrat MPs elected. And if we do that, we can get this awful government out. What happens after polling day, I'm just not going to go there. Many of my predecessors went there, and it distracted from their main focus.
You are ruling out the Conservatives. You're not ruling out a deal with Labour, and I think the viewers will see that you are keeping your options open at election. I think it's a bit disingenuous that you won't be straight about that.
No, I think it's very clear. People who've done my job...
It's really clear. You're not doing a deal with the Tories, and you might with Labour.
Well,
really
the Conservatives are in government. They've betrayed our country, I think, on so many levels. I think people are sick and tired of them, and they want them out of government. And Liberal Democrats can play a critical role. Indeed, large parts of the country, in the Blue Wall, in the West Country, only a vote for the Liberal Democrats can defeat the Conservatives.
I haven't heard you on camera say that you want the UK back in the single market in the EU. I've heard lots of people ask you, and I haven't heard you actually say it.
Well,
so I'd like to hear it from your mouth.
As the leader of the party, I'm going to tell you what the Liberal Democrats' position is. And let me say, on the back of those documents you referred to, we are clearly pro-European and proudly pro-European. We want Britain back at the heart of Europe.
You want us back in the single market and back in the European Union. Will you just utter the words for me? It's in your policy document.
I'm going to try to finish my sentence for once. What we're clear is in the next Parliament, over the next few years, we've got to deal with what's on the table here and now. And what's on the table is a relationship with our European neighbours which have been fractured. They do not trust us anymore because the Conservatives have damaged that trust. Boris Johnson kept lying to our European neighbours.
Yes.
And so
my question isn't about Boris Johnson. My question is about you saying that you want us back in the single market and the European Union. Not just say it.
Beth, to be fair, you talked about policy papers, and I'm referring directly to our policy papers. Our policy paper, actually published over a year ago, that's how transparent we are, has a 4-step process.
I know.
Carefully and considered. It will take some time. People will need to be patient. We need to rebuild that relationship. We need to rebuild the case for greater European cooperation, which the Conservatives have also trashed. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to talk about that it's in our national interest.
I'm going to leave it with this. That's, I think, quite a cowardly answer. People were marching on the streets wanting to rejoin the European Union this week, and you, as the leader of the Liberal Democrats, will not on camera say emphatically, yes, I want to join the single market in the European Union.
I think that is totally wrong. What it is a practical, realistic answer that deals with the situation we have at hand, not the situation that there was at the last election. You know, people have to realise that things move on, and I think that's the real thing, and I hope you and your viewers will understand that as we make our case.
OK, Ed Davey, thank you so much.
Just relax. Beth Rippey there interviewing Lib Dem leader Ed Davey. Let's go Labour, the shout from them. That's not a very off message at Lib Dem conference, just heard them, some people walking by there. Anyway, let's bring in Polly and Dick, shall we? It felt to me like there were kind of two big things to come from that interview with Beth, which you can take in turn. The first was the fact that he wouldn't rule in or out any coalition with Labour, and the second was about rejoining the EU and saying that's not a policy he would commit to on camera. So on the coalition question, I know you guys hate talking about it, but there's a reason that we're asking about it, because this is the closest that the Lib Dems could realistically get to government and to changing policy and lives. Do you think that Ed Davey should be a bit more upfront in whether or not he'd go into coalition with Labour?
I don't think it benefits anyone, actually, because we have this really weird, stupid first-past-the-post voting system. And in the end, voters have to go for the best person in their seat.
You could get that change as a red line. You know, that's what one of the activists was saying to me earlier. Yeah, I'd have a coalition if voting reform was a red line.
Well, yeah, but, you know, you don't necessarily get to decide what the context of those conversations is. I think, having had the experience of being in coalition government and being basically obliterated as a result, I think it would be very difficult for the Liberal Democrats to go into a coalition again. I also don't see what Keir Starmer really gains from it. I mean, I don't know. Dick may have a different perspective, but we saw the way the DUP managed to hold power, so much power over Theresa May when she didn't have a majority. The politics of that for the minority party worked so much better. If there is a hung parliament, I just imagine it being left in both sides' interests to just keep talking and not stitch up a coalition, which just makes politics so complicated for both sides.
Interesting, but actually in some ways you could hold more power being slightly outside the tent, but holding the balance of power. What's your take on coalitions?
I've spent most of my political career with Lib Dem leaders being sidetracked from winning votes by people asking them about coalitions.
Pesky journalists.
I know, they're a terrible lot. But what I'm bothered about is our representation in the Commons is minuscule, and I want it to be big. And I want to spend all my time, and Ed wants to spend all his time, talking about the things that voters want to talk about, not the kind of things that we're obsessed about internally as parties. And you know what those big issues are, and I'm not going to rehearse them. But the key thing is, for us, to be in a position to have MPs in significantly greater numbers, so that we might be in a position, in certain circumstances, to exercise greater influence. End of. Until we get to that position, talking about what you might do in a hypothetical thing isn't just a waste of time. It's positively a backward thing to be doing in terms of our ability to actually get to a position of some influence in the first place, in my view.
You were saying there about issues that voters want to talk about. Well, one of the issues is the EU, right?
No, it isn't.
Well, loads of people were marching about it. An awful lot of Lib Dem voters care very deeply about it.
Well, in the last year, Sophie, I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands of people on doorsteps, in by-elections and in local elections. And the number of people who have raised the EU with me is 2. And they're so rare, I could take you to their doors virtually. The other issues are raised with me lots of times.
So why won't... I guess the issue with journalists, right, is that if we feel that we're not getting a straight answer on something, then it makes us we're like terriers. It just makes us want to keep poking and work out why the politician isn't being straight with us. And I think that's kind of what Beth was feeling with Ed Davey when it came to the policy on rejoining the EU. Why won't you just say what the policy is? What is the policy?
Oh, I mean...
It's to rejoin, right?
I'm not sure that I know, actually, because, again, most people don't pay attention to the policies of political parties. So I think Dick is right. You know, the details of the policies, right? Like, politics is painted in bright colours. Most people, it's not the first thing that they think about, whether it is to leave even more or to go back in. It's not top of people's minds.
So why can't you just tell us what the policy is on it, and then it feels like we probably just move on?
I'm really ashamed. I literally don't know. But here's the thing. The reason I think that Britain should realign itself with the European Union and should go back in again is because the stuff people care about, which is the economy, which is our health services, which is the mess of our immigration system, those things can actually be addressed operationally by partnership with the European Union. And I do think it's a kind of crying shame that politicians are unable to tell the truth about Brexit. I don't think we will be able to tell the truth about anything in politics until we can tell the truth about Brexit. But I understand why they've got all of this scar tissue, because let's face it, since the Brexit referendum, most political discourse went insane. The Brexit derangement syndrome that people talk about. People talk complete nonsense on every side, and it's harming our politics.
Talking about scar tissue, you bear a bit of scar tissue from the coalition years.
I'm all scar tissue, Sophie.
I just wonder, we were talking about the kind of obliteration of the Lib Dems after that. How difficult was it? You went in having a clear set of priorities, knowing what you wanted to get from it. Do you feel that was kind of chiselled away at? What's your memory?
There was this moment just after the 2015 election campaign, which sticks deeply in my mind, where we gathered at the headquarters, and Paddy Ashdown stood on a desk, and he said, "You're all doing brilliantly. We love, all of the usual things." And then he said, "Why would anyone act in the national interest ever again?" And his voice cracked, and my voice cracks when I even think about it. And that's what's so heartbreaking, is that, people say the Liberal Democrats were doing it out of to get ministerial cars or to get power. Plenty of mistakes were made, but it was absolutely driven at every stage by a belief that we were doing the right thing for the country. And so much of what I have hated about politics since is that sense that people are thinking about party before country. And unless and until we can resolve that, I think it will be hard for great people to be drawn into political life at all.
To try and end on a bit more of an upbeat note, and I can see, to be honest, speaking to you, how it's, you have got the scar tissue from that period. It feels like the mood here in Bournemouth is the most boring that I can remember from a Lib Dem conference for a long time.
It is, because we've had great successes recently. The result of the 2015 election was like a very, very hard kick in the solar plexus. And it's taken us years to be taken credibly by voters, by journalists, by everybody. And now, because we've been able to win by-elections, to gain 400 seats in local elections, suddenly we're not a joke party. People don't say to us, well, are you on the way out? We're on the way back. Politics is cyclical. We're on the way back. And that's a better feeling than the alternative. And that's why people here are so up, because they can see potential.
Really interesting to talk to both of you about the fortunes of the Lib Dems. Now, coming up on the Politics Hub. From cannons and clocks to bubbles and bricks, we are going to look back at the best and worst, mostly the worst, let's be honest, Lib Dem by-election stunts.
Wonderful. I'm sitting here with Nikos. He is virtually Nikos in this taverna, which he owns, and he likes to make a few pounds.
Me and Bjorn, we go back way, long time.
So he's come up with this idea to have like a Mamma Mia party in his taverna.
Exactly.
Because the movie was, the first movie was such a big hit.
It was.
It was filmed in Skopelos, and now the tourists are flocking.
The tourists are flocking. Yeah. Nikos wants to earn some money, and it's the aftermath of them films, isn't it?
Yeah.
The film's already done. This is a different story to the films that you love and see. And it brought back memories, I said to Bjorn, it brought back memories of living in Cyprus when I was younger, in a taverna, family-run business, and it just sort of brought a lot of emotion. And Stacey, the director, said, would you consider doing it? And I said, I'll only consider doing it if I audition, because I don't want people to think I got the part because of what I do or what I've done. I wanted to prove my worth, and I did the audition. Bjorn sort of ticked the box and said, yeah, he's our new Nikos. And yeah, he was very, very happy last night, and I'm so happy he's happy. You literally leave your troubles outside, you come into the Nikos' taverna, you leave your troubles outside, and you come into the Mamma Mia world, Mamma Mia the party world, and you are literally entertained. There's a love story that goes through it as well. Nikos' troubles, Nikos is the matriarch, but he's a soft puppy inside, and yeah, there's so much that goes on, and people can get up and dance, they can sing, they can do whatever they want. It's a free party, and it's all because of this genius here next to me.
And it's you know, it's 3-4 hours away from all the troubles out there.
Outside.
Because it is a dark age we're living in, I think, and people need this kind of happiness. Just forget about everything else for a couple of hours.
Just have a party, yeah.
But my favorite to perform was my solo, which was Does Your Mother Know?
Oh, great song.
I love doing that. I love being the, you know,
the front
top idol, the front man, the front man.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. We're in Bournemouth for a Lib Dem conference, bursting with optimism that their post-coalition slump can be reversed. Now, the evidence in support of this can be seen in the recent by-election triumphs, which were followed by some of the weirdest but yet most memorable political stunts in recent memory. I can't make my mind up whether it's genius or like the worst thing ever. I can't work it out.
It's genius, Sophy.
Is it?
Yeah,
Are you
genius,
sure?
Yeah. You know, politics is such a hard business. When you win something, you've got to enjoy it.
What's your favourite ever stunt, Lib Dem stunt?
There's something about the blue wall, I guess, that's quite... I understand the metaphor. Some of these, you just feel like... I need to maybe take some LSD to really understand what the hell is going on here.
My favourite bit about the blue wall, though, is Ed Davey's really struggling to knock it down. He's got this tiny little hammer, and it's like...
I don't think they could find a hammer that was the right size without getting, you know, one that weighed 5 kilograms, you know, which he'd have swung him off his feet.
My favourite Lib Dem stunt was way back in the coalition years, and I remember Danny Alexander coming out with a yellow budget, a little budget box, because obviously the Chancellor always has a red budget box, so he wanted to get on the action. He had the yellow Lib Dem, the alternative budget. You must remember this.
I do. It's because it was right towards the end of the coalition period, and George Osborne and Danny Alexander had to like negotiate a budget. But it was full of sort of Osborne anti-Miliband tricks, and so Danny wanted to put forward his own
alternative,
and it had to be specially custom made out by the budget box maker people.
I didn't even know this.
And then
this is amazing.
It was auctioned to raise money for the party in the end, I think.
There you go. Favourite stunt?
I like the balloon. It always makes me smile.
It does. I mean, to be honest, it did make me smile. Oh, my other favourite thing is the cannon. You know, the cannon after the most recent by-election win, and there was a picture of the Paul Stauffer crouching behind it, ready to set it off.
We were wondering if someone was going to come out of it. You know,
so what's going to emerge from this cannon?
Sadly,
it's going to be a human cannon.
But what I like about them, I think you have to talk about it because it's so stupid. But also, it makes Ed Davey smile. My first ever job was for Ed Davey in politics. And so I've known him for 20 years, and he always frowns. He's hyper sincere. You ask him a question, he just starts to frown because he feels it so deeply. And it's so nice to see him just let loose and smile.
Give the guy a hammer and a blue wall.
Yeah.
You know.
And he's
happy.
And he's happy. That's what he wants. I love it. Have any of you been involved in just quickly any of the stunts yourself? Or
no, we did a big thing with Gurkha medals, which we surrendered in order to win Gurkha citizenship rights for the Gurkhas. But that was 2009, and it was a bit sort of.
Sounds a bit earnest for a Lib Dem.
It was very earnest and not very silly, but we did use my jewellery box for it.
Oh, that's quite good.
I once stood outside the Treasury with Vince Cable before 2010 with a massive cheque, fake cheque, because the national debt had reached £1 trillion.
I love it. These are the things to kind of put on your political autobiographies, the best ever stunts that you guys were involved with. Thank you very much for standing out in the cold for us for the Politics Hub this evening. Lovely to have you both here. Well, that is all for tonight on the Politics Hub. But remember, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day. It's been great to be here in Bournemouth. We're going to have more from the Lib Dem conference tomorrow. Good night and see you tomorrow.